El numero 4. How many of you know who the 120 men of the Great Assembly are? Have you guys, any of you heard of those guys? The 120 men of the Great Assembly. Well, it was basically a panel of prophets and sages over about a 200 or 300 year period that consisted at different times, not all at once, obviously, but at different times, of Ezra, Nehemiah, Mordecai, Daniel, Simeon the righteous, and prophets like Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. What they did is they, obviously not all at the same time, but at different stages from roughly 516 BCE to 332, they were the religious leaders in Israel, and so they codified a number of things. And one of their accomplishments was the composition of the Shemona Esra, okay, the 18, or the standing prayer, the Amidah, okay. And so it's a series of 18 prayers, and they're prayed 3 times a day by devout Jews. And we're going to just focus in on the first 3 of those prayers, and one in particular, the second one. But the point I want to make here, though, in mentioning this, is that it is the 120 men of the Great Assembly, which included Zechariah, Malachi, some of the latter prophets. It included some of them. And so they together worked on, and I don't know any of the specifics, but they are the ones, this is one of the things that they accomplished was this prayer. So what I want to do, though, is I want to look at one aspect of this prayer, because we're talking, as I said, around 500 to 300 BCE, right? So when we look at this prayer, we gain insight into their thinking and to how they interpreted Scripture, right? So let's do that. Let's see what we can learn from there. So the first 3 prayers are attributed to the patriarchs. Now, when I say attributed, what I mean is this. It's not true, but they, like for the first prayer, is called Avot. And it's attributed to Abraham as if he were the one who came up with the prayer. He did not come up with the prayer, okay? The Jewish sages did. But they attribute it to him. And it's all about God. It's all about the fathers and how God protected Abraham. One of the last line is one word phrase that's using is Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham. That was the first prayer. The third prayer is known as the holiness of God's name, and it's attributed to Jacob. Now, Jacob didn't say this prayer, but they act as though, there we go, that phrase again, as though he said it. And this is basically when he was on his way to Padan Aram. Remember Jacob's ladder? And remember he was struck with awe of the place. And he says, this is the gate to heaven. This is the house of God, and I didn't know it. So he was struck with God's holiness there. And so this third prayer, they attribute to him. But what we want to focus in on is the second prayer. The second prayer is known as God's power, Gevurot, and it's attributed to Isaac. And again, Isaac did not come up with this prayer, but it is as though, they say it's as though he came up with the prayer. And so we're going to look at this second prayer, and we're going to gain insight into what they felt and what they thought about Isaac and resurrection, okay, because it's clearly in this prayer. So the question is, how did the 120 men of the Great Assembly see Adonai's power manifested in Isaac's life? And we're going to see, because the prayer is called God's power. All right, here's the prayer. You are eternally mighty, my Lord. The resuscitator of the dead are you, abundantly able to save, who makes the wind blow and makes the rain descend, who sustains the living with kindness and resurrects the dead with abundant mercy, who supports the fallen, heals the sick, releases the confined, and maintains his faith to those asleep in the dust. Who is like you, O Master of mighty deeds, and who is comparable to you, O King, who causes death and restores life and makes salvation sprout. And you are faithful to resurrect the dead. Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh Hamatim, who resurrects the dead. Now, do you see how, number one, they're attributing this to Isaac and it's God's power. And now we understand in what way they are attributing this to God's power. They're attributing it to God's power to resurrect the dead. And they're attributing it to Isaac. And this is all what we've been talking about with all the midrashim, how in the midrashim, in these sayings of the sages, some kind of way they saw in Isaac's life, and especially in the binding of Isaac, they saw resurrection. And as I said, the men who came up with this prayer included some of the prophets of Israel as it was formulated. Right? So look at all of these references to resurrection from the dead, and they attribute it to Isaac. In other words, this last line, I read a couple of midrashim to you yesterday, and it was a couple of lines, and they said, and therefore Isaac said, blessed are you, Adonai, who resurrects the dead. You see, they attribute it to Isaac as if he did say it, and even though he didn't, right? Okay, so the dominant theme of this prayer is Adonai's ability to resurrect the dead, right? It mentions resurrecting the dead 4 times in this passage. And when he says you restore life, we know that restoring life means resurrecting the dead, right? So that's 5th time. What does it mean that he maintains his faith to those asleep in the dust? That's resurrection, right? That Adonai will resurrect us one day. Just like Job said, though in my flesh worms may destroy this body, yet in my flesh I'm going to see God, right? What does it mean that he makes salvation sprout? Well, again, remember what I told you? On day 3, we see living things being created, right? And so on day 3, we see life springing forth from where there is no life. And again, that's associating the number 3 with resurrection. And the reason why is because Adonai is keenly interested in us understanding about Messianic prophecy, and that the great work of the Messiah is that he would die and be raised on the 3rd day. And so it's all about resurrection. Sprouting vegetation is equal to resurrection. If you look at Isaiah 26, 17 through 19, especially verse 19, Isaiah 26, 19, it talks about how when vegetation sprouts forth, that it's all about the resurrection of the dead. And so clearly, the 120 men of the Great Assembly, they understood the Torah's language of resurrection as though Isaac had resurrected from the dead. But again, how did they understand that, right? How did they understand? Because I've already read to you guys a number of these midrashim, which are pretty wild, right? And, they just go off in different directions. But they were like, they knew that Isaac has something to do with resurrection. So as early as the 4th century BCE, the idea that Isaac had died and resurrected in the Akedah was already understood. So remember, as I told you before, some modern Jewish rabbis, they think, all this stuff about resurrection from the dead, that all came about because of Christianity. Jews didn't want to be outdone, and so they came up with all these. No.
No. Is that why the English says resuscitator of the dead? Resuscitator. Mm-hmm. They don't even use the word resurrection.
It's all translation, right? It's just translation. It's just a translator.
Why they chose that word?
Yeah.
Is it because that lingering Christianity polemic?
Yeah.
That they have.
I don't know. You have to.
I don't know.
You have to ask them.
Throwing it out there. What is it?
You have to ask them. I don't know. I told you I love Mickey. Stevie. All right, Stevie. No, I don't know. Seriously, I don't know. But as far as depending on who the translators are, right? And hey, guess what? So remember what I told you, that in many Reform Jewish congregations, they changed that from he who resurrects the dead to him who gives life to all, because they don't believe in the resurrection. Because many liberal Jewish congregations, right? Yeah. Many of them, they don't believe. So they changed that last Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh Hametim, who resurrects the dead, they changed that to who gives life to all, right? Okay, so how did they understand this? What made them think that Isaac died, and what made them think it is as though he had died? Well, let's get to it. We already talked about seeing resurrection in the story of the Akedah logically, so I'm not going to go over that. We also saw how you could see resurrection in the story of the Akedah through the sign of the Messiah. That's what we did in the last teaching. But is there another method? And so what I'm about to share with you is what I think and what I believe is what convinced them to associate Isaac with resurrection. I believe the sages understood the story of the Akedah as a story about resurrection because of key thematic connections that they made, and not because of its association with pagan practices and rituals, as Shalom Spiegel, the author of The Last Trial, said. So let me remind you again of the principles of thematic connections that I work by. Number one, the number one reason why thematic connections exist is to show equivalence between people, places, things, and events. This is equal to that. And the number two reason is those connections are established so that we can learn something new, so that we can learn something, so that Adonai can show us something. The three most important scriptures that we're going to look at are Genesis 18, 10 through 14, Genesis 21, 1 through 7, and Genesis 22, 1 through 14. Those are key passages that I believe the sages of Israel and the 120 men of the Great Assembly used in order to see resurrection in Isaac's life. Now, I want you to think about the story of Isaac's near death and the Akedah, right? This is a story about an old man and an old woman, both past childbearing age, and they have a son in their old age. Can anybody think of another story in the Bible that's similar to that? What other story? In the Tanakh. In the Tanakh. I didn't say that, but yeah, in the Tanakh. Pardon? Isaac and Rebekah, yeah, but they weren't all that old. They weren't all that old. I'll sweeten the pot a little bit here. I bet I get the right answer now. No, I'm just kidding. No, but you are right. They did have trouble conceiving, right? Yes, but it doesn't say that they were old. This particularly says they were old.
The lady that made the room for Elijah.
Boom, the Shunammite woman. Right, there you go, right there, right? The Shunammite woman, right? The Shunammite woman. Let's look at this story. Now remember, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you how I believe the masters of the Midrash and how the 120 men of the Great Assembly, how they saw resurrection in the story. So I want to read a few, let's go through this story. And I'm about to give you some thematic connections between that story and those three key passages that I gave you. In 2 Kings 4:22, Elisha said to Gehazi, summon that Shunammite woman. And that's thematically connected to the three men who visited Abraham, and they're asking for Sarah's whereabouts. They say, hey, where's Sarah? Okay? You guys see how we've made a thematic connection, right? Three men are visiting Abraham, and they say, where's Sarah? And Elisha asks Gehazi, says, summon that Shunammite woman. Okay? By itself, it's like, doesn't seem like it's all that important, right? But let's keep going. Because remember what I told you, when you find one thematic connection, you look for more in those two stories. And if you find an abundance of thematic connections, that means that Adonai wants you to connect those two passages. So in 2 Kings 4:14 versus Genesis 18:11, both stories involve a barren woman and an old man. Okay? Both stories, they specifically mention that. Again, these are thematic connections. They're themes, similar words, similar phrases, topics, events, situations, and circumstances in these two different stories. 2 Kings 4:15 versus Genesis 18:10. Both the Shunammite woman and Sarah stood in the doorway or the entrance of their dwelling places. When you go and read the story about the Shunammite woman, and when you read the story about Sarah, it's going to say that they both stood in the doorway. And it's kind of an unusual fact. in both of those stories, you know what I mean? Sometimes you read a story and it will mention certain facts. And, if you're thinking about it, you're like, well, what difference does it make? Right? I mean, seriously, what difference did it make that Sarah was? Okay, all right, so anyway. But quite often, some extra facts are added to a story so that you will make the thematic connection to some other story, like in these two right here. They both stood in the door. 2 Kings 4:16 versus Genesis 18:14. In both stories, the Hebrew word la moed is used in a promise that a son will be born to you next year. Okay? The three men said that. The three men said that to Abraham in Genesis 18. He said, "At this time next year, Sarah shall have a son. You shall have a son." This time, at this appointed time or set time, is la moed. In 2 Kings 4:16 and in Genesis 18:12, both women express unbelief in the promise. Right? Remember Sarah laughed? Right? She's like, pfft. I can hear her now going, pfft. She's like, pfft. Oh, please. Right? And then remember the Shunammite woman? She's like, don't lie to your maidservant. Hey, you don't have to promise. It's no big deal, right? Both of them, unbelief that at that time in the next year that they're going to have a son, right? Remember what I told you? Thematic connections exist to show equivalence between people, places, and things. Is everybody with me that it seems like as though the scripture is saying the Shunammite woman is equal to Sarah and Sarah is equal to the Shunammite woman? You see what I'm saying here? Right? That's what the scripture is doing, right? Everything that happened to Shunammite woman is happening to Sarah. Everything that happened to Sarah is happening to Shunammite woman. Why? Because Adonai wants us to see that they are equivalent in some kind of way. So let's keep going. Now what we're going to do, so those were connections between the story of the Shunammite woman and the passage in Genesis 18. Now we're going to see connections between the Shunammite woman and connections to things in that passage in Genesis 21, 1 through 7 that I mentioned, okay? So we're just jumping through here. It says, oh my goodness. Let me see, is this it? Oh yes, this is it. I love this. All right? I'm going to read this to you guys. And you guys, some of you guys are going to go, what? Are you kidding me? Watch this. 2 Kings 4:17. And tell me that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not trying to get us to connect these two stories. After you see this, watch this. But the woman, pay attention to all the phrases that are yellow, bold, italicized print. But the woman conceived and bore a son when the appointed time had come, of which Elisha had told her. Now compare that to Genesis 21:2. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God has spoken to her. Now tell me that Adonai didn't want us to connect these two passages. I'm telling you, man, we got the peanut gallery. I love it. Thank you, Stevie. Right? Listen to that. But the woman conceived, for Sarah conceived, and bore a son, and bore Abraham a son. When the appointed time had come in his old age, at the set time, and both of those words are set time and appointed time is la moed, of which God has spoken to, at which God has spoken to him, of which Elisha had told her. Right? How come you don't believe that, Mickey? Mick. How come you don't believe that, Stevie? I'm just messing with you. All right? Does everyone see what I'm saying? Is it not obvious that, oh my goodness, right? Remember, what I'm doing is I'm going to show you how I believe they saw this, okay? And it all starts with making these connections right here. 2 Kings 4:18 versus Genesis 21:8. Both passages mention how the child grew up. Isaac grew up. The Shunammite woman's son grew up. 2 Kings 4:19 through 28 versus Genesis 21:14. In both passages, the boy is given to his mother. Okay? In both passages, the boy is given to his mother. Okay? Now, what did I say? Thematic connections exist to show equivalence between people, places, things, events. So now, can we not say that it is as though the Shunammite woman's son is equal to or equivalent to Isaac? Right? Everything that's happening to the Shunammite woman's son is happening to Isaac. Everything that's happening to Isaac is happening to the Shunammite woman's son. It's very obvious, you know.
Only the son would die.
Yes, exactly. And we're going to get to that. All right? Oh, look at that.
Just kidding.
No, it is. If all it says the Shunammite woman's son dies. All right. Man, I need to, you know what? Everywhere I go teach, you need to come and sit in the front row. All right. 2 Kings 4:20b. All right. The Shunammite woman's son dies. Now, this is where the stories are going to take a little different kind of turn here, right? But in Genesis 21:15 through 16, Ishmael is brought to death's door. Now, remember, we saw all of those connections between Isaac and Ishmael earlier today, right? We saw that Ishmael equals Isaac. Right? So what the Lord is doing here is he's getting us to, all right, so he's bringing in Ishmael here, but more importantly, in Genesis 22:10, Isaac is brought to death's door. Now think about this. The scripture has painted a picture where Isaac is equal to the Shunammite woman's son. The Shunammite woman's son dies, literally, but what happened to Isaac? He's just brought to death's door. But we also saw that Isaac was equal to Ishmael, and Ishmael was brought to death's door also. So do you see how the scripture is setting up this parallel where the Shunammite woman's son dies, and we're supposed to see that he equals Isaac, right? Right? All those connections are telling us the Shunammite woman's son equals Isaac. And what happened to the Shunammite woman's son? He died. Are we supposed to see maybe that Adonai is trying to teach us that it is as though Isaac died? It's exactly what's going on. It's exactly what's going on. By making these connections here, we can see that. The Shunammite woman placed her dead son on Elisha's bed. Remember, Ishmael was placed under the tree to die, and Abraham placed Isaac on the altar to die. Right? Oh my goodness. See, God, you know, He has woven this together because He wants us to see resurrection. He wants us to see that Isaac is a picture of Yeshua, who would die and be raised in 3 days. And he's showing us here that it is as if Isaac died by connecting him to the Shunammite woman's son. So the Shunammite woman's son, Isaac and Ishmael, they're all equivalent to each other. And what we need to see is that when that Shunammite woman's son dies, when he dies, it's teaching us it's as if Isaac died, as if Ishmael died. Let's just stick with Isaac, because that's what it's all pointing to, okay? That it's as if Isaac died. All right? 2 Kings 4:22-23, the Shunammite woman asked for one. So now we're going to make connections to that third set of scriptures, to Genesis 22, right? So there were 3 sets of scriptures, Genesis 18, Genesis 21, and Genesis 22. So now we're going to make connections from the Shunammite woman's story to Genesis 22. And watch this. The Shunammite woman asked for one of the attendants and a donkey so that she could hurry to the man of God and return. Hurry to the man of God and return. And when it was asked of her, now her son had died, for context, her son had died. And she's about to go and go to Elisha to tell him. Now her son had just died, and someone, I can't remember who, I think it might have been the servant, asked her, Is it, how are you doing? What's going on? And she was like, it is well, a statement of faith, right? Her son is dead. When she says this, her son is lying dead on the bed. And she said, it is well, right? That's thematically connected to Abraham, Genesis 22, 3 through 5. Abraham took his 2 young men, attendants, just like, right, attendants, and they saddled a donkey over there to hurry to the man of God. And here's a statement of faith of Abraham, because Abraham is going to go sacrifice his son. And notice what he says, I and the lad Isaac will go yonder. We will worship and will return to you. So here's Abraham knowing that he's going to go and sacrifice his son. And notice what he said. I and the lad will go yonder. He said, we will worship and return. That's we will worship and we will return. Statement of faith. Just like the Shunammite woman said, all is well. All is well. The Shunammite woman came to Elisha on Mount Carmel, right? And it says that as she was coming, it says that Elisha, he saw her from afar. That's thematically connected to Abraham went to Mount Moriah. And on the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and he perceived the place from afar. You see all these connections. Adonai is just making a little banquet for us here. A banquet on the Word of God, right? 2 Kings 4, 8 through 37 verses the HaAkeidat, Genesis 22. 2 stories about the death on the one hand and the near death on the other hand and resurrection of a boy born to a barren woman and an elderly man. Both stories thematically connected to the hilt. I'm suggesting that this is the basis for the notion that Isaac died and was resurrected at the HaAkeidat. Because they saw these connections. They saw them. And in a second, I'm going to show you something that 100% proves that they saw it. Right? Okay? When I say 100%, I mean 100%. There will be zero doubt. Zero doubt. Okay? When we get into the text, we're going to see that we know they saw these connections. So watch this. The importance of Genesis 18, 10 through 14, and Genesis 21, 1 through 7. Those 2 passages bring us up to the death of the child using the Ishmael narrative, okay? So in other words, remember I told you Genesis 18 and Genesis 21, 1 through 7 or 8, those 2 passages, the thematic connections between those 2 passages and the story of the Shunammite woman, they bring us up to the death of the child, okay? Now, Genesis 21, 1 through 22, right? That includes the binding of Isaac. Those passages bring us to the resurrection of the child. It kind of looks like this, okay? So, oops, sorry about that. Uh-oh, what happened? What did I do? Okay, there we go. All right? So Genesis 18, 1 to 12, and Genesis 21, all of these passages right here bring us up to the death of the Shunammite woman's son and parallels to Isaac and Ishmael. And then this passage right here, Genesis 22, 3 through 14, that is the story of how they're connected as far as the resurrection. The Shunammite woman's son is resurrected. Isaac, right? He was brought to death's door. He was supposed to die. But then the last second, Abraham sees the lamb, and so he lives, okay? All right. Another witness. The story of the Shunammite woman is a story of resurrection. However, it's clearly thematically connected to another story. So what Adonai is going to do right now is he's going to pile on for all skeptics. For all the skeptics. As if what I've just shown you isn't enough. How many of you know that there's another story in the Tanakh about a barren woman whose son dies and is resurrected? Who was that? Anyone remember? There it is right there. You remember the widow of Zarephath? The widow of Zarephath had a son who died also. And what I want to show you here is the story of the widow of Zarephath is also thematically connected to the stories. In 2 Kings 4:1 versus 1 Kings 17:9, both stories are about widows. So the first part of 2 Kings 4 is about a widow who's running out of oil, okay? That's what that one's about. Both women, so the woman excuse me, the woman who's running out of oil and the widow of Zarephath, they both have a financial dilemma. Remember, the widow of Zarephath, she was really, really poor. Remember, she said, all I've got is, this jar of oil, and, I'm picking up and some flour, and I'm picking up a couple of sticks. I'm going to cook this. We're going to eat it and die, right? And the woman in the beginning of 2 Kings 4, she said the creditors were coming to take her 2 sons away from her. So they were both poor, all right? Both prophets, Elisha and Elijah, asked the widows a question. Both widows have a little oil in the jar, right? The sons of both widows face death. The sons of the widow of the prophet face death through exile or slavery. The son of the widow of Zarephath faced literal death and starvation. In both stories, the prophets tell the widows to do something unusual with their meager possessions. With the woman who only had a jar of oil, he told her, he said, look, go gather jars and containers from all of your neighbors, right? Go gather those jars and begin to fill them up, okay? And what he said was, make something for me first. The same thing happened over in 1 Kings 17 with Elijah. All right, Elijah and Elisha, right? They both want the women to make them something first. In both stories, the oil is multiplied. Okay? In both stories, the oil is multiplied. In both stories involve women who are landlords and a prophet living in the upper room. Okay? All right? In both stories, the boy grows up, and something happened after these things. And then in both stories, the son of the now we're comparing the widow of Zarephath and the Shunammite woman. And in both of those stories, the son of the Shunammite woman and the son of the widow of Zarephath, they die. You see? So now we're seeing the connections between the widow of Zarephath and the Shunammite woman, okay? Both women chided the prophet because of the death of their sons. The Shunammite woman, when she caught up with Elisha, she said, didn't I tell you not to do this? Basically is what she said. I'm just paraphrasing. And the widow of Zarephath, she said, what she said was, did you come to reveal my sins and cause my son to die? Okay? All right. In both stories, the dead son is placed on the prophet's bed. So in other words, what I'm trying to show you is that there are so many connections between the Shunammite woman and the widow of Zarephath, okay? They both involve the story about the resurrection of a dead son. In both stories, the prophet raised the son to life by prostrating himself over the boy, okay? So the story of the resurrection of the Shunammite woman's son is clearly thematically connected to the story of the resurrection of the widow of Zarephath's son. Now let me ask you guys, did I say earlier that I just want to make sure I didn't make a mistake. Did I say that the widow of Zarephath, that she was barren? I don't think I said that. I did say that. Okay, yeah, that's not true. Sometimes when I'm up here, my mind is going right. So I thought I said that. That's not the connection, okay? Got a little off. The connection is that they both had sons who died, okay?
May have said that, but it wasn't on the slide.
Okay, all right, good deal. All right, so since the story of the Shunammite woman is thematically connected to the HaAkeidah, so is the story of the widow of Zarephath, right? It's all about the resurrection of a child. So by thematically connecting another story involving the resurrection to the Shunammite woman, Adonai is literally shouting at us, saying that it's as though Isaac were resurrected. Because he gave us all those clear connections between Isaac's Akedah and the Shunammite woman's son. Isaac equaled the Shunammite woman's son. He died and was resurrected, so we are to see it as if Isaac died and was resurrected. And that's what these are pointing to us. All right. The final unmistakable proof that the ancient sages understood the story of the Akedah was a story about death and resurrection. Here's the final proof. And I'm going to submit to you the final proof that they may have seen some of the other things that we talked about earlier today, but for a fact, they saw the connections between the Shunammite woman and Sarah, between the Shunammite woman's son and Sarah's son. The unmistakable proof of that is that the story of the Shunammite woman is the haftarah for the Torah reading from Genesis 18 to 22. Genesis 18 to 22, remember I told you the scriptures in Genesis 18, Genesis 21, and Genesis 22. All three of those scriptures come from the Torah portion called Vayera. All three of those passages come from the Torah portion called Vayera, which goes from Genesis 18 to Genesis 22. And the Haftarah reading, right? The Haftarah reading for that Torah portion is the story of the Shunammite woman's son. So they saw the connections without a doubt. They saw them without a doubt. And they saw that Isaac was to be seen as if he were resurrected. And the reason why is because they made the connection between Isaac and the Shunammite woman's son. The sages of the past chose this story of the death and resurrection of the Shunammite woman's son to complement the story of the Akedah in Genesis 22 in Torah portion Vayera, because they saw all of these connections, and of course they saw them. You remember the ones, and he gave him a son at the appointed time, those two sentences that almost went together verbatim. Of course they saw it. But what's more important is that they understood, hey, you know what, it's as if Isaac is resurrected. And the masters of the Midrash, they did the same thing. They understood that it was as if Isaac had resurrected. But they were only seeing these were shadows to them. They didn't know how to put it all together, right? They didn't know, oh yeah, this is Messiah and he's going to be in the tomb for 3 days. They didn't understand it. But you know what? In Romans 2 it says that, Paul says, well, why is it important to be Jewish? He said, chief in every way. He said, because unto the Jewish people were committed the oracles of God. Adonai committed his word to the Jewish people. And I submit to you that not only did he commit his word to them, but he also committed to them how to study it and how to interpret it. Everything I'm telling you today is about thematic connections. I didn't come up with it. Right? It's not something I invented. I learned it from Jewish sources. That's how they did it. The very first article that I read, Menachem Leibtag. He's a non-Messianic rabbi, and I read one of his Torah portion articles. Menachem Leibtag, the Tanakh Study Center. The Tanakh Study Center. Excellent place to go study Torah. It's non-Messianic, right? But you can learn a lot, right? They're not gonna be with you step and step on Yeshua. I got that. But let me tell you something. I read one article. The first article that I read from that man, it was just one article, and I said, I don't know what, because this is before I knew what thematic connections are. And I read an article from him, and I said, I don't know what he's doing, but whatever this man is doing in this article, I want it, and I want more of it. And I started studying his Torah portion. And I wasn't studying it trying to find Yeshua. This is in the early 2000s. I wanted to just get a good foundation on the Torah, just the Torah itself. But what happened is, as I started to apply this principle of making thematic connections, all of a sudden I started seeing messianic prophecy, right? I wasn't even looking for it. I was just trying to understand this idea of how do you make a thematic connection. He used that phrase. And I'm telling you, it took one article, and I was blown away. I was like, whoa. I was like, man, this is how you study the Torah. I was like, this is how you study your Bible. And so I went after it. And so I've been doing it for 20 years. About the Haftarah selections, no one is sure who chose the Haftarah portions or when they were instituted, right? At least not that I found, right? Most scholars agree, though, that they were possibly instituted during the period of the Maccabean revolt when the Greek king Antiochus forbade Torah reading. So that's a possibility. I don't know if it's true or not, right? But one thing that we do know is that the Haftarah readings were chosen before the first century. We know that for a fact. And here's the reason why. We know this because historical evidence of the Haftarah readings are found in the New Testament or in the apostolic writings. All right, I'll give you a couple of them. Luke 4:16 through 19. So he came to Nazareth, Yeshua, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. In other words, he was handed a reading from the Haftarah because he was reading from the prophets. They had already read the Torah, and now it was time for the Haftarah reading. And the same thing, and similarly in Acts 13:15. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, that's the Haftarah reading right there. So what we do when we get together on Shabbat and when we read the Torah portions and we read the Haftarah readings, they were doing that first century. It had already been around, right? It's just not sure who actually chose them. So if we make the thematic connections that Adonai has placed in his word, we can only conclude one thing concerning the Akedah. It is a story about death and resurrection, just as the masters of the Midrash said. Now, their stories were a little fanciful because they didn't have the complete picture, but they were on the right track. Right? I'm not sure why. All right, so last couple of things here. More messianic gleanings. The last couple of slides here. Barren women. Remember the Shunammite woman and Sarah, they were both barren. And someone had mentioned earlier, I think, had mentioned that Rebekah was barren, Rachel was barren, Manoah's wife was barren, Hannah was barren, Elizabeth was barren. They all needed supernatural help to conceive. Why is this? Why is it that all these women are barren? The reason why is because of Genesis 3:16. Let me read it for you. Genesis 3:16. And follow me on this. After Adam and Eve sinned, Adonai came. First, he addressed the serpent in Genesis 3:15. Because you have done this, you are cursed. More than all cattle and more than every beast of the field, on your belly you shall go. You shall eat dust all the day of your lives. Now, look at verse... I'm sorry, that was 14. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. To the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain, you shall bring forth children. In other words, this is a prophetic statement right here that put something into play where it says that not only are you going to have pain in labor, it says even your conception you're going to have trouble. And this is the reason why all of the matriarchs, they had trouble conceiving. It's because of Genesis 3:16 right here. Not only was it that you're going to have labor in childbirth, but just bringing forth the seed, especially the seed of the Messiah. You know, it almost seems like any woman in the Bible that's going to bring forth the seed that has something to do with the Messiah is fraught with difficulty. And the reason why is because of Genesis 3:16. It's the reason why Sarah was barren all of her life. It's the reason why Rebekah couldn't conceive at first. It's the reason why Rachel was barren. Rachel, she bore Joseph, one of the greatest messianic figures in the Bible. It all goes back to Genesis 3:16, because even sorrow in your conception, and that's the reason why the women of Israel that seem to be either in the lineage of the Messiah or who were giving birth to some person who was important, like John the Baptist or like Samuel, their mothers were barren, and it's because of Genesis 3:16. But they all foreshadow Mary. They're all prophetic pictures of Miriam, who needed supernatural help to conceive Yeshua because she knew no man. You see what I'm saying? They all foreshadow Miriam, who needed supernatural help in order to bring forth Yeshua the Messiah, because she knew no man. So all of these barren women, it was impossible for them to have children outside of divine intervention. And it was impossible for Mary to have a child outside of divine intervention. And that's why they're all prophetic shadows of Yeshua. And in Romans 4:19, Paul says, and not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, speaking of Abraham, since he was about 100 years old, nor the deadness of Sarah's womb. Here again, Paul is showing us how we are to associate life and resurrection with Isaac. Right? Because what he's drawing on is this picture here. He's saying that Abraham's body was dead. He couldn't produce seed. And he's saying Sarah's body was dead. Her womb had never brought forth life. Her womb was barren. Her womb was dead. No life had ever come out of her barren womb. So he says, nor out of the deadness of Sarah's womb. So therefore, when Isaac was born, as Paul is using resurrection language here to teach us that when Isaac was born, it was like resurrection from the dead, because life sprang forth out of that dead and barren womb where no life had ever come forth before. Hallelujah. Both Sarah and Miriam received divine revelation that they would conceive. And remember Sarah's unbelief, right? Remember Sarah's unbelief? And remember, it was Adonai himself, right? He says, is anything too hard for the Lord, right? You know what you're supposed to thematically connect that to? This, Luke 1:37. For with God, nothing. Remember when Mary said, how can this be? Right? Mary said, how can this be? How can I have a child? I've known no man. And what did Adonai say? For with God, nothing will be impossible. And you just connect that right back to what he said to Sarah. Is anything too hard? He spoke it to both of them. He spoke it to both of them. Is anything too hard for the Lord, Sarah? Miriam, for with God, nothing will be impossible. Conception was life from the dead. Remember I told you guys about the number 3? This is our last slide. Remember I told you about the number 3? And that the number 3 is the number of resurrection? Abraham was 99 years old when he received the promise that Isaac would be born. And 99 is 3 times 33. Sarah was 90 years old when she received the promise that Isaac would be born. And 90 is 3 times 30. So all throughout the scripture, as I said, Adonai is trying, thematically to show who Yeshua the Messiah is and to prove that the Messiah is the one who will die and be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, and then he will be resurrected.
There's a precious mystery woven through the word of God. When a man should die, but then he lives by the grace of Adonai. His life is just a shadow of the one we are to see. So open your